I woke up to my dog barking at 5 in the morning, which was unusual because Rex never made noise unless something was seriously wrong. I stumbled out of bed, pulled on some jeans, and looked out my bedroom window toward the backyard. Even in the dim pre-dawn light, I could see that something was catastrophically wrong. My brand new fence, the beautiful cedar privacy fence I had just installed 3 weeks ago for $8,000, was completely gone. Not damaged, not vandalized, gone. I ran downstairs and threw open the back door, stepping into my yard in bare feet. The morning dew soaked my toes as I stood there staring at the empty space where my fence had been. The posts had been pulled out, leaving gaping holes in the ground. There were tire tracks in the grass, deep gouges from heavy equipment. Someone had come in the night with machinery and systematically demolished and removed my entire fence. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. While I waited for the police, I walked the perimeter of my property, documenting everything with my phone camera. The destruction was thorough and professional. This was not random vandalism. This was a planned operation. 2 officers arrived within 20 minutes. Officer Martinez was a stocky man in his 40s with kind eyes, while his partner Officer Chen was younger and took meticulous notes as I explained the situation. "So you went to bed around 11 last night and the fence was intact?" Martinez asked. "Absolutely. I was out here at 10:30 letting Rex do his business. The fence was fine." "And you didn't hear anything during the night?" "Nothing. I'm a heavy sleeper and my bedroom is on the front side of the house. But this had to involve machinery, right? Look at these post holes." "They used something powerful to yank those posts out." Chen nodded, photographing the tire tracks. "These look like they came from a small excavator or a bobcat." "Did you have any disputes with neighbors?" I hesitated. "Not neighbors exactly, but I've been having issues with the HOA president, Brenda Kowalski." Martinez's eyebrows raised slightly. "What kind of issues?" "I bought this house in Maple Ridge subdivision in Henderson, Nevada 6 months ago. It's my first home and I've been fixing it up. The previous owners let things go, so I've been doing improvements. 3 weeks ago, I installed this cedar fence. It cost me $8,000 and I made sure it met all the county codes. I got the proper permits, everything. And the HOA had a problem with it. Brenda showed up the day after installation, literally measuring the fence with a tape measure. She said it was 6 inches too tall according to the HOA covenants. I showed her my permits, showed her that it met county regulations, but she insisted the HOA rules superseded county code. Officer Chen looked up from his notes. "Did you check your HOA covenants before building?" "I did. The covenant says fences cannot exceed 6 feet in height. My fence is exactly 6 feet tall." But Brenda measured from her side, where there's a slight slope in the ground, and she claimed from that angle it measured 6 feet 6 inches. I explained that fences are measured from the property owner's side, from level ground, but she wouldn't listen. "What happened after that?" Martinez asked. "She sent me a violation notice demanding I remove the fence within 14 days or face daily fines of $100. I responded in writing, explaining that the fence was compliant and providing documentation. Then she sent another letter saying the fines had started, and I now owed $700. "That was 3 days ago." Martinez exchanged a glance with Chen. "Do you think she's responsible for this?" "I don't know who else would be, but how would she even arrange something like this?" "And why do it illegally instead of going through proper channels?" "We'll look into it," Martinez said. "In the meantime, we'll file a report for destruction of property and theft. The value of the fence puts this in felony territory. Do you have receipts for the installation?" "Everything. Receipts, photos, permits, the whole paper trail." After the officers left, I called my insurance company and then sat on my back porch, watching the sun come up over my now completely exposed backyard. My neighbors on both sides could see directly into my property. The house behind me had a clear view of my entire yard. The privacy I had paid for was obliterated. At 8 o'clock, I called my fence contractor, Miguel Santos. He had done beautiful work, and he had been professional and thorough throughout the installation. "Miguel, someone tore down my fence last night." There was a long pause. "What do you mean tore it down?" "I mean it's completely gone. Posts, panels, everything. Removed during the night." "The police were here this morning." "That's impossible. Are you telling me someone stole an entire fence, demolished it and hauled it away? There are excavator tracks in my yard." "Jesus." "I'm so sorry, man. That fence was beautiful. Do you know who did it?" "I have suspicions. Can you come by and give me an estimate for replacement? My insurance will want documentation." "I'll be there in an hour." Miguel arrived right on schedule, and his face fell when he saw the destruction. He walked the property line, shaking his head. This was a professional job. "Look at how clean these post holes are. Someone knew what they were doing." "Can you replace it?" "Of course. Same materials, same design." "But this is going to be another 8,000 minimum, probably closer to 9 because lumber prices went up last week." "Your insurance should cover it though." "As long as I can prove it wasn't my fault. I'll write up the estimate today and email it to you." After Miguel left, I decided it was time to confront Brenda. The Maple Ridge HOA office was located in a small building near the subdivision entrance, next to the community pool. I drove over there at 10 o'clock, still wearing my work clothes because I had called in sick to deal with this disaster. Brenda Kowalski was exactly what you would imagine when you heard the term HOA Karen. She was 53 years old, had the signature "Let me speak to your manager" haircut, and wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She sat behind a desk covered in color-coded files and looked up at me with an expression of supreme annoyance when I walked in. "Mr. Patterson, I don't recall us having an appointment." "Someone destroyed my fence last night, Brenda. Tore it down and hauled it away. The police are investigating." Her face remained carefully neutral. "How unfortunate." "Perhaps it was stolen for the lumber. Cedar is quite valuable these days." "Cut the act. You've been harassing me about that fence for 3 weeks. You're the only person with a motive to do this." Her eyes narrowed. "Are you accusing me of a crime, Mr. Patterson?" "I'm saying it's a hell of a coincidence." "I suggest you be very careful about making accusations you cannot prove. The HOA has been attempting to work with you regarding your violation, but you have been uncooperative. If you continue to refuse to comply with our covenants, we will have no choice but to place a lien on your property." "There is no violation. The fence meets every legal requirement." "The fence violated HOA covenants, and now I understand there is no fence at all, which means you're currently in compliance. Perhaps this is a blessing in disguise." I felt my hands clenching into fists. That fence cost me $8,000. Home ownership comes with expenses. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. I left before I said something I would regret. Back home, I paced around my destroyed yard trying to think clearly. If Brenda was responsible, how could I prove it? The police would investigate, but without evidence, they couldn't do anything. That afternoon, my neighbor from 3 houses down, Pete Gallagher, knocked on my door. Pete was a retired contractor in his 60s who had lived in Maple Ridge for 15 years. "Hey kid, I heard about your fence. Drove by this morning and couldn't believe it." Word travels fast. "Small neighborhood. Listen, I might have some information for you. Can I come in?" We sat in my living room, and Pete leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. "I was up late last night, couldn't sleep. Around 2 in the morning, I went out to my front porch to have a smoke. I saw a truck drive by, pulling a trailer with what looked like a small excavator on it. It was heading toward your street. Did you see what kind of truck? Big white pickup, maybe a Ford F-350. The kind contractors use, had some kind of logo on the side, but I couldn't make it out in the dark. Did you see it leave? I went back inside after I finished my cigarette, so no. But I thought it was weird, someone hauling equipment through the neighborhood at 2 in the morning. Did you tell the police? I called the non-emergency number and left a message. Figured you should know too. Thanks, Pete, this is helpful. There's something else. I've lived here a long time and I've seen Brenda pull some questionable stuff before. About 8 years ago, she had a problem with a guy who painted his house a color she didn't like. The paint job was fine, matched the approved palette, but Brenda thought it was too bright. One night, someone spray-painted graffiti all over his house. The guy had to repaint the whole thing. And you think Brenda was involved. Couldn't prove it, but the graffiti happened right after he refused to repaint on his own. Convenient timing. After Pete left, I called Officer Martinez and passed along the information about the white truck. He promised to follow up on it. The next few days were frustrating. My insurance company sent an adjuster who confirmed the fence had been deliberately destroyed, but they needed the police investigation to conclude before they would approve the claim. Meanwhile, I had received another letter from Brenda, this one congratulating me on coming into compliance and stating that the fines were suspended. I spent my evenings researching HOA law in Nevada. What I learned was disturbing. HOAs had enormous power, but they were also required to follow due process. Brenda had never given me a hearing, never allowed me to formally contest the violation. She had simply declared the fence non-compliant and started assessing fines. On Thursday, 5 days after the fence destruction, Officer Martinez called me. "Mr. Patterson, we've got a lead. A white Ford F-350, matching your neighbor's description, is registered to a small contracting company called Desert Demo and Hauling. They operate out of a yard on the east side of Henderson. Have you talked to them? Not yet. We wanted to coordinate with you first. Would you be available to come down to the station tomorrow morning? We're going to bring the owner in for questioning." "Absolutely. What time?" 9 o'clock. I barely slept that night. The idea that we might actually get answers, that someone might be held accountable, kept my mind racing. The next morning, I arrived at the Henderson Police Department at 8:45. Officer Martinez met me in the lobby and led me to a small conference room. The owner of Desert Demo is named Frank Sullivan. He's on his way in now. We're not arresting him at this point, just asking questions. He doesn't know we've connected him to your case yet. What's the plan? We're going to ask him about jobs he did last week, see if he volunteers any information. If he lawyers up, we'll need to take a different approach. 20 minutes later, Frank Sullivan arrived. He was a weathered man in his 50s, wearing work boots and jeans covered in dust. He looked nervous. Martinez conducted the interview in a different room while I watched through a one-way mirror with Officer Chen. "Mr. Sullivan, thanks for coming in," Martinez began. "We're investigating a case of property destruction that occurred in the Maple Ridge subdivision last Sunday night into Monday morning. Can you tell me where you were during those hours?" Frank shifted in his seat. "I was home asleep." "You own Desert Demo and Hauling, correct?" "That's right. Do you keep records of your jobs?" "Of course, I'm a licensed contractor." "Can you tell me what jobs you worked last week?" Frank pulled out his phone and scrolled through it. "Monday, I had a pool deck removal in North Las Vegas. Tuesday and Wednesday were a garage demolition in Henderson. Thursday I was off. Friday was a small fence removal." Martinez leaned forward. "Tell me about the fence removal on Friday." "Just a small job. Lady wanted an old chain-link fence taken out, paid cash." "What was the lady's name?" "I'd have to check my records. But she paid cash." "Yeah, $500. "And you removed a chain-link fence." "That's right. "Mr. Sullivan, what kind of truck do you drive?" "White Ford F-350. And you transport equipment with it?" "Yeah, I've got a trailer for my Bobcat." Martinez pulled out a photograph of my yard showing the tire tracks. "Do these tracks look familiar to you?" Frank studied the photo and his face went pale. "I want to talk to a lawyer." The interview ended there. Martinez came back to the conference room where I was waiting. He lawyered up, but we've got enough to get a warrant for his business records. The fact that he mentioned a Friday fence removal and cash payment is significant. But he said Friday, not Sunday. People often get their days mixed up when they're lying. We'll know more once we see his records. 2 days later, on Sunday, Officer Martinez called me at home. We executed the warrant on Desert Demo, found some very interesting things. Like what? Frank Sullivan keeps a job log, and here's where it gets interesting. There's no entry for any work done the weekend your fence was destroyed. But we found a deposit slip for $2,000 in cash made on Tuesday morning, 2 days after your fence disappeared. Can you prove the money came from my fence job? We're working on it. Here's the other thing. We pulled Sullivan back in for another interview, and this time his lawyer advised him to cooperate in exchange for reduced charges. Frank told us everything. My heart was pounding. And Brenda Kowalski contacted him 3 weeks ago, right after your fence went up. She told him she had a job removing a fence that was in violation of HOA rules. She said you had been notified and refused to comply, so the HOA was exercising its right to remove the violation. That's a complete lie. Frank didn't know that. He thought it was a legitimate HOA enforcement action. Brenda showed him the violation notices and convinced him everything was legal. She paid him $2,000 in cash to remove the fence after midnight when you would be asleep. She told him to pull the posts, load everything onto his trailer, and haul it away. She even gave him your address and told him which gate to use to access your backyard. I felt a surge of vindication mixed with rage, so she deliberately destroyed my property. Worse than that. She commissioned the destruction under false pretenses and paid cash to avoid leaving a paper trail. Sullivan has agreed to testify against her in exchange for a plea deal on lesser charges. He genuinely believed he was doing legitimate HOA enforcement work. What happens now? We're getting a warrant for Brenda Kowalski's arrest. She'll be charged with criminal mischief and theft, both felonies given the value of the fence. We'll also look at fraud charges for deceiving the contractor. You should contact a lawyer about civil remedies too. When will you arrest her? Monday morning. We want to make sure we have everything documented perfectly. Monday morning, I called in sick to work again. I wanted to be available when things started happening. At 10 o'clock, Officer Martinez texted me, "In custody, being processed now." I drove to the police station and waited in the lobby. About an hour later, I saw Brenda being led through in handcuffs. Her face was red with fury, and she was demanding to speak to her lawyer. She saw me sitting there and her eyes blazed with hatred. "This is your fault," she screamed at me. "You and your illegal fence. I was protecting property values." An officer guided her away and Martinez came out to meet me. "She's not taking this well," he said with a slight smile. "What happens next?" "She'll be arraigned probably tomorrow." Given the charges and the premeditated nature of the crime, bail will likely be set fairly high. You should retain a civil attorney and file a lawsuit for damages. I took his advice. That afternoon, I met with a lawyer named Sarah Chen who specialized in property law and HOA disputes. She was a sharp woman in her late 30s who listened to my entire story without interrupting. "This is one of the more egregious HOA abuse cases I've seen," she said when I finished. "And I've seen some bad ones. Here's what we're going to do. First, we file a lawsuit against Brenda Kowalski personally for the destruction of your fence. That's $8,000 in damages, plus consequential damages for your time, stress, and loss of use of your property. Can we sue the HOA too? Possibly. If we can show that Brenda was acting in her capacity as HOA president, or that the HOA board knew about or endorsed her actions, then yes. We'll need to do some discovery first. I'll also file an emergency injunction preventing the HOA from taking any further action against you regarding the fence. How much is this going to cost me? I'll take this on contingency. We'll get 33% of whatever we recover plus expenses, but given the facts here, I'm confident we'll recover substantial damages. Let's do it. Sarah moved fast. By Wednesday, she had filed the lawsuit and the injunction. The injunction hearing was scheduled for Friday. On Thursday, I received a hand-delivered letter at my house. It was from the HOA board, and it informed me that Brenda Kowalski had been removed as president and placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the criminal investigation. The new acting president was Pete Gallagher, my neighbor who had witnessed the truck. That evening, Pete called me. I need to come talk to you about the HOA situation. When he arrived, he looked stressed. The board held an emergency meeting last night. Once Brenda was arrested, we started digging into the HOA records. We found some disturbing things. Like what? Brenda has been running this HOA like her personal fiefdom for years. She's been assessing fines without proper procedure, denying hearing requests, and in some cases, pocketing money that should have gone into the HOA reserves. We're talking potential embezzlement on top of everything else. How much money? We're still auditing, but it looks like maybe $20,000 or $30,000 over the past 5 years. Small amounts taken regularly. We've contacted the HOA's attorney and a forensic accountant. What does this mean for my case? It means the HOA is going to cooperate fully with your lawsuit. We're also going to suspend all pending violations until we can review them to make sure they were legitimate. I'm sorry, man. I've been on this board for 3 years, and I knew Brenda was strict, but I didn't know she was doing illegal stuff. Friday's injunction hearing was held at the Clark County Courthouse. Sarah had subpoenaed Frank Sullivan to testify, and the courtroom was packed with curious neighbors from Maple Ridge who had heard about the scandal. The judge was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s named Judge Patricia Reynolds. She reviewed the filings carefully before looking up at Sarah. Miss Chen, you're seeking an injunction preventing the HOA from taking any enforcement action regarding your client's fence. That's correct, Your Honor. The fence was built in full compliance with all applicable codes and regulations. The HOA president, acting without authority and due process, commissioned its illegal destruction. We're seeking to prevent any further harassment while the criminal and civil cases proceed. The HOA's attorney, a nervous young man named Jason Mills, stood up. Your Honor, the HOA board has already voted to suspend all enforcement actions against Mr. Patterson. We're not opposing this injunction. In fact, we support it. Judge Reynolds raised her eyebrows. The HOA is not opposing. No, Your Honor. The board has placed Ms. Kowalski on administrative leave and is cooperating with the investigation into her conduct. Very well, Mr. Sullivan, please take the stand. Frank Sullivan was sworn in and Sarah began her questioning. Mr. Sullivan, please tell the court about your interactions with Brenda Kowalski regarding the destruction of Mr. Patterson's fence. Frank looked uncomfortable, but he spoke clearly. Miss Kowalski contacted me in early March. She said she was the president of the Maple Ridge HOA and had a fence that needed to be removed. She told me the homeowner had been notified of a violation and refused to comply, so the HOA was going to remove it. Did she show you any documentation? Yes, she showed me some letters on HOA letterhead about a fence violation. It looked official. What did she ask you to do? She wanted me to remove the fence after midnight on Sunday, March 9th. She said to do it when the homeowner was asleep so there wouldn't be a confrontation. She gave me the address and told me exactly where the fence was. Did she pay you? Yes, $2,000 in cash. She said the HOA preferred cash for this kind of work to keep it simple. Did you think there was anything unusual about this request? Frank hesitated. In hindsight, yes, but at the time she seemed legitimate. She was the HOA president, she had official documents, and I've done work for HOAs before. Sometimes they do enforcement actions. But have you ever done an enforcement action in the middle of the night? No, ma'am. And have you ever been paid in cash for HOA work? No, ma'am. Usually it's a check from the HOA account. Thank you. No further questions. Judge Reynolds looked at the HOA's attorney. Any cross-examination? No, Your Honor. The HOA accepts Mr. Sullivan's testimony as accurate. The judge turned to me. Mr. Patterson, please approach. I stood at the podium, and Judge Reynolds looked at me over her reading glasses. Mr. Patterson, I've reviewed your case file, including the permits for your fence construction and the photographs of the destruction. I'm granting your injunction. The HOA is hereby prohibited from taking any enforcement action regarding your fence or any related structure you choose to build in compliance with applicable codes. Furthermore, I'm ordering the HOA to pay your attorney's fees for this hearing. This is an egregious abuse of HOA authority, and I want to send a clear message that such conduct will not be tolerated. Thank you, Your Honor. I also want to note for the record that I'm forwarding this case file to the Nevada Real Estate Division, which oversees HOAs in this state. They may want to investigate the governance of this particular association. The hearing ended, and Sarah and I walked out of the courthouse into the bright Nevada sunshine. That went well, she said. Now we focus on the civil suit. Over the next several weeks, things moved quickly. Brenda's criminal case proceeded through the court system. She was charged with felony criminal mischief, theft, and fraud. Her bail was set at $50,000, which she posted through a bail bondsman. The local news picked up the story, and suddenly I was getting calls from reporters wanting interviews. HOA president arrested for fence destruction made headlines in the Las Vegas Review-Journal. The story resonated with people because everyone had HOA horror stories. Meanwhile, Sarah's investigation uncovered more disturbing information. Through discovery, we obtained emails from Brenda's personal account where she discussed the fence removal with her daughter. In one email, she wrote, "That arrogant Patterson thinks he can ignore our rules. I'll show him what happens when you don't respect the HOA. I found a contractor who will take care of the problem for cash." The emails were damning evidence that this was premeditated and personal, not a legitimate HOA action. In April, about 6 weeks after the fence destruction, Brenda's attorney reached out to Sarah about a settlement. "They're offering to pay for the fence replacement plus $10,000 in damages," Sarah told me over the phone. "Is that a good offer? It's a starting point, but we can do better." The emails show malice, which means we can pursue punitive damages. I'm going to counter with $50,000. Do you think we can get that much? I think we can get more if we go to trial. But trials are unpredictable. Let me negotiate and see where we end up. 2 weeks later, Sarah called me with an update. We settled for $45,000. That includes $8,000 for fence replacement, $7,000 for consequential damages, and $30,000 in punitive damages. After my fee and expenses, you'll net about $28,000. That's more than I expected. Brenda's attorney knew they would lose at trial. The evidence is overwhelming. She's also facing pressure from her own homeowner's insurance, which is refusing to cover this because she acted in bad faith. What about the criminal case? That's proceeding separately. Her trial is scheduled for June. I used part of the settlement money to hire Miguel to rebuild my fence. This time, we added security cameras covering the entire backyard. I wasn't taking any chances. The fence reconstruction took a week, and Miguel did another beautiful job. When it was finished, I stood in my backyard and felt a sense of satisfaction. Not only did I have my privacy back, but I had stood up to an abusive HOA president and won. In late May, Pete called me with more news about the HOA investigation. We finished the forensic audit. Brenda embezzled $47,000 over 6 years. She was using her position to write checks to fake vendors, then cashing them herself. We've filed a report with the police, and they're adding embezzlement charges to her case. That's insane. It gets worse. We also found evidence that she was selectively enforcing violations against people she didn't like while ignoring the same violations when her friends committed them. We've got dozens of people who were fined unfairly. The HOA is going to have to refund a lot of money. What's happening with the board? We're implementing new oversight procedures. No single person will have unilateral authority anymore. All enforcement actions will require board approval with proper notice and hearing procedures. We're also hiring a professional management company to handle day-to-day operations. That sounds like good changes. We learned our lesson. Brenda was able to run wild because we weren't paying attention. That's on all of us. Brenda's trial began on June 15th. I attended every day, sitting in the gallery and watching the prosecution systematically destroy her defense. The prosecutor, a methodical woman named Amanda Torres, laid out the timeline of events with precision. She showed how Brenda had become obsessed with my fence, how she had contacted Frank Sullivan, how she had paid him cash and instructed him to commit the destruction in the middle of the night. Frank testified again, providing the same account he had given at the injunction hearing. But the prosecution also called several other witnesses. Miguel testified about the quality and compliance of the fence he had built. He explained the permitting process and how carefully he had measured to ensure the fence met all requirements. Officer Martinez testified about the investigation and the evidence they had collected. Pete testified about seeing the truck in the neighborhood at 2 in the morning. But the most damaging testimony came from Brenda's own daughter, Ashley, who was called as a prosecution witness. Ashley was 30 years old and clearly uncomfortable being there. "Miss Kowalski, did your mother discuss Mr. Patterson's fence with you?" Amanda Torres asked. "Yes, she called me several times about it." "What did she say?" "She was really angry. She said he was defying her authority and making her look weak. She said she had to do something dramatic to show the neighborhood that you can't just ignore the HOA." "Did she mention how she planned to handle it?" "She said she was going to have the fence removed and make him pay for it." "Did she mention doing this legally through the courts?" "No. She said courts took too long and cost too much. She said she knew a way to handle it quickly." "Did you advise her against this?" Ashley's eyes filled with tears. "I told her it was a bad idea. I told her she could get in trouble, but she wouldn't listen. She never listens." Brenda's defense attorney, a tired-looking man named Robert Harding, tried to argue that Brenda had genuinely believed she was acting within her authority as HOA president. But the prosecution's evidence was too strong. The emails, the cash payment, the timing of the destruction all pointed to a deliberate criminal act. The trial lasted a week. On June 22nd, the jury deliberated for 3 hours before returning with their verdict: guilty on all counts. Brenda's face crumpled when the verdict was read. Her husband, who had been sitting behind her throughout the trial, put his head in his hands. Sentencing was scheduled for August. In the meantime, the Nevada Real Estate Division completed its investigation into the Maple Ridge HOA. They issued a scathing report documenting Brenda's abuses and the board's failure to provide oversight. The HOA was fined $30,000 and placed under supervised probation for 2 years. The civil lawsuit against the HOA itself was settled separately. The HOA's insurance paid out an additional $20,000 to cover my legal fees and additional damages. The insurance company then filed a separate lawsuit against Brenda to recover their costs. By July, my life was returning to normal. The new fence was beautiful, my cameras provided peace of mind, and the HOA had new leadership that actually followed the rules. Several neighbors thanked me for standing up to Brenda, telling me their own stories of her arbitrary enforcement and petty tyranny. One afternoon, I was working in my yard when my next-door neighbor, Linda Martinez, came over with a plate of cookies. "I wanted to thank you," she said. 3 years ago, Brenda fined me $500 because my roses grew over the property line into the common area. She said it was a violation and demanded I pay immediately or she would put a lien on my house. I was so scared I just paid it. Now I realize she made that up. There's nothing in our covenants about plants near the property line. Did you get your money back? The new board refunded it last week. I'm one of 17 people who got refunds. Brenda was just making up violations to generate money. I'm glad you got your money back. We all are. You did the right thing fighting her. A lot of us were too afraid. August 3rd was Brenda's sentencing hearing. I attended with Sarah, curious to see how Judge Reynolds would handle it. The prosecutor requested prison time, arguing that Brenda had abused a position of trust and shown no remorse for her actions. The defense attorney argued for probation, citing Brenda's lack of a criminal record and her declining health. Judge Reynolds listened to both sides, then addressed Brenda directly. "Miss Kowalski, you held a position of responsibility in your community. People trusted you to enforce rules fairly and act in the best interests of the homeowners. Instead, you abused that trust in the most egregious way imaginable. You commissioned a crime against a homeowner who had done nothing wrong except refuse to submit to your illegal demands. You paid cash to avoid detection, you planned the destruction to occur in the middle of the night, and you showed absolutely no remorse until you were caught." Brenda started to speak, but the judge held up her hand. Furthermore, the evidence shows this was not an isolated incident. You embezzled funds, selectively enforced rules, and created an atmosphere of fear in your community. This was not a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a pattern of abuse spanning years. The judge paused, reviewing her notes. "On the charge of felony criminal mischief, I sentence you to 2 years in the Nevada Department of Corrections. On the charge of theft, I sentence you to 18 months to run concurrently. On the charge of fraud, I sentence you to 1 year, also concurrent. On the embezzlement charges, I sentence you to 3 years to run consecutively." I did the math in my head. That was 5 years total. "However," the judge continued, "I'm suspending all but 18 months of your sentence. You will serve 18 months in prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. You are ordered to pay full restitution to Mr. Patterson and to the HOA for the embezzled funds. You are also permanently barred from serving on any HOA board in the state of Nevada." Brenda was crying now, and her husband was comforting her. "Additionally," Judge Reynolds said, "I'm ordering you to perform 500 hours of community service after your release, and you will be required to attend anger management counseling. I hope you use your time in prison to reflect on your actions and the harm you caused." The bailiff led Brenda away in handcuffs. Her husband followed, looking defeated. Outside the courthouse, Sarah and I stood on the steps in the summer heat. 18 months is significant for a first-time offender, she said. The judge wanted to send a message. "Do you think it will change anything?" "Maybe," HOAs need accountability. People need to know they can fight back when their rights are violated. You showed them that's possible. Over the following months, I followed up on the restitution payments. Brenda's assets were liquidated to pay back the HOA and me. Her husband filed for divorce 3 months into her prison sentence, and their house in Maple Ridge was sold to cover the debts. The HOA implemented the reforms Pete had promised. They hired a professional management company, created clear procedures for violations with proper notice and appeal rights, and established financial oversight to prevent future embezzlement. Pete served as president for a year before stepping down, satisfied that the organization was on the right track. I stayed in my house in Maple Ridge, and the neighborhood gradually recovered from the scandal. Property values, which had dipped slightly during the news coverage, rebounded within a year. On a Saturday afternoon in November, almost 9 months after the fence was destroyed, I was in my backyard throwing a ball for Rex. The fence that Miguel had rebuilt was weathering beautifully, developing a nice gray patina. My security cameras watched over everything, recording peacefully. My phone buzzed with a text from Pete. "Board meeting next week. Want to join? We could use someone who knows how to stand up for themselves." I thought about it for a minute, then texted back. "Maybe next year, still recovering from the last round." He sent back a laughing emoji and a thumbs up. I looked around my yard, at the fence that had caused so much trouble and ultimately brought justice to a corrupt HOA president. Sometimes standing up for yourself was exhausting. Sometimes it meant months of stress, legal bills, and uncertainty. But it was worth it. I had bought this house because I wanted a place of my own, a place where I could make improvements and build a life. Brenda had tried to take that away from me through intimidation and illegal action. But I had fought back and I had won. Not just for me, but for all the neighbors who had been bullied and abused over the years. The 17 people who got their money back. The future homeowners who would be protected by better rules and oversight. Rex ran back with the ball and dropped it at my feet, tail wagging. I threw it again, watching him race across the grass in the afternoon sun. In January, I received a notification that Brenda's restitution payment had been completed. Between the sale of her house and her other assets, she had paid back every dollar she owed. The HOA's reserves were restored, and my settlement was fully funded. I used some of the money to make more improvements to my house. I renovated the kitchen, updated the bathrooms, and landscaped the front yard. Every improvement was done with proper permits and full documentation, but the new HOA board never questioned anything. They had learned their lesson about overreach. In March, exactly 1 year after the fence was destroyed, I hosted a neighborhood barbecue in my backyard. Pete came, along with Linda and about 20 other neighbors. We grilled burgers and hot dogs, and people admired the fence that had started everything. "You know," Pete said, holding a beer and looking at the cedar panels, "this is probably the most famous fence in Henderson. I could have done without the fame. Maybe. But you changed things around here. People aren't afraid of the HOA anymore. They know their rights. That matters." He was right. Several neighbors had told me they felt more confident making improvements to their homes now. The culture of fear that Brenda had created was gone, replaced by something healthier. In June, I attended a Clark County workshop on HOA governance. The presenter used my case as an example of what happens when HOAs exceed their authority. It was surreal hearing my story told to a room full of homeowners and board members. During the Q&A session, someone asked me what advice I would give to homeowners dealing with difficult HOAs. "Document everything," I said. "Keep copies of all correspondence, take photos, get permits for any work you do. Know your rights under your state laws and your CC and Articus." And don't be afraid to push back when the HOA is wrong. They have power, but it's not unlimited. What if you can't afford a lawyer? Someone else asked. Look for attorneys who work on contingency for clear-cut cases. Also, your state probably has resources. Nevada has the real estate division that oversees HOAs. Many states have similar agencies. Use them. After the workshop, several people approached me to share their own HOA horror stories. It was clear that Brenda's abuse of power was not unique. HOAs across the country had boards that acted like petty dictators, making up rules and imposing arbitrary fines. But there were also good HOAs, ones run by reasonable people who understood their role was to maintain common areas and enforce legitimate rules, not to harass homeowners over trivial matters. In September, 18 months after she was sentenced, Brenda was released from prison. I only knew because Pete mentioned it at a board meeting he had convinced me to attend. She's living with her sister in Reno, he said. Her ex-husband got the divorce finalized and she's not allowed to come back to Clark County except for her probation meetings. Good, I said. I hope she learned something. Her sister told someone at the HOA that Brenda still thinks she was right, that you were the problem and she was just doing her job. I shook my head. Some people never learn. True, but at least she can't hurt anyone else here. As fall turned to winter, my life settled into a comfortable routine. Work was good, Rex was healthy, and my house was exactly what I wanted it to be. The fence stood strong and straight, protecting my privacy and marking my boundaries. Sometimes I thought about that morning when I woke up and discovered the destruction. The shock, the anger, the feeling of violation. It seemed like a lifetime ago. But it had taught me valuable lessons about standing up for myself, about fighting injustice even when it was hard, and about the importance of accountability in positions of power. In December, the Maple Ridge HOA held its annual meeting. The new board presented their accomplishments over the past year. Improved financials, better communication with homeowners, and 0 violations that resulted in complaints or legal action. At the end of the meeting, Pete stood up to address the room. I want to recognize someone who made a lot of this possible, he said, looking at me. When our previous president abused her power, this person didn't just roll over and accept it. He fought back through the legal system, exposed corruption, and forced us to make changes. Our community is better because of his courage. Let's give him a round of applause. The room erupted in clapping, and I felt my face flush with embarrassment, but I also felt proud. Not because I was special or heroic, but because I had done what needed to be done when it mattered. After the meeting, as people filed out into the cold December night, Linda approached me with a smile. My daughter is buying a house next month, she said. First thing I told her was to read the HOA documents carefully and don't be afraid to stand up for herself if they try to bully her. Good advice. She asked me why I was so adamant about it, so I told her your story. Now she's telling all her friends who are buying houses, you're like a cautionary tale that helps people. I laughed. I guess that's one way to look at it. Driving home that night, I took the long way through the neighborhood, looking at all the houses decorated for Christmas. Lights twinkled on roofs and in yards, wreaths hung on doors, and inflatable snowmen bobbed in the wind. It was a normal, peaceful neighborhood. The kind of place where people raised families and built lives, the kind of place I had wanted when I bought my house. Brenda had almost ruined that for me. But in the end, her abuse of power had made the community stronger. The HOA was better managed, homeowners were more informed about their rights, and there were checks and balances in place to prevent future corruption. I pulled into my driveway and sat for a moment, looking at my house. The porch light was on, and through the window I could see Rex waiting for me. My fence, strong and solid, surrounded my property. This was my home. I had fought for it, defended it, and won, and that made all the difference. The next year brought more positive changes. The professional management company hired by the HOA proved to be efficient and fair. Violations were handled with proper notice, hearings were granted when requested, and the arbitrary fines that had plagued homeowners under Brenda's regime disappeared. I eventually did join the HOA board, not as president, but as a regular member. My experience gave me insight into how to balance enforcement of legitimate rules with respect for homeowners' rights. We worked together to update the CC and Articus, removing outdated restrictions and clarifying ambiguous language that had allowed for abuse. Frank Sullivan, the contractor who had torn down my fence, completed his community service and probation. He reached out to apologize personally, and we met for coffee one afternoon. "I should have known something was wrong," he said. "The cash payment, the middle of the night timing, but I wanted to believe it was legitimate. You testified when it mattered," I told him. "That took courage. I'm just glad I could help make it right." My fence stood for years after that, weathering storms and seasons, a reminder of the importance of standing up for yourself and fighting for what's right. Neighbors would sometimes point it out to visitors, telling the story of the HOA president who went to prison for having it torn down. It became a symbol in Maple Ridge, not of conflict but of justice. A reminder that even powerful people have limits, and that ordinary citizens can hold them accountable when those limits are exceeded. And every time I looked at that fence, I remembered the lesson I learned. Home is worth fighting for, both the physical structure and the principles that make it truly yours. The fence stood tall and straight, marking boundaries and protecting privacy, just as it was meant to do. And I stood behind it, secure in the knowledge that I had defended my rights, and in doing so had helped create a better community for everyone. That was worth more than $8,000 in cedar. That was worth everything. Word count, 12,086.